The draft is less than 1 month away, and the Jets' draft strategy will be determined by numerous factors, including how they feel about certain wildcard players on their roster. We'll talk about who those wildcard players are, and the Jets' confidence level in them on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, April 4th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit that subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a thumbs up. It helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Our episode today is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, the NFL draft is just a few weeks away. In fact, it begins 3 weeks from Thursday. So all focus is now on the NFL draft. And the Jets' draft strategy will be determined by numerous factors. The one everybody always points to is needs. And I'm not saying that needs are irrelevant when it comes to the draft, but I think sometimes fans and media members view needs as the only factor that determines who the Jets and other teams pick in the draft. And there's more that goes into it than that. And even within needs, it's not clear what the Jets think their own needs are, because there are certain players who, depending on the Jets' confidence level in them, play positions that either could be needs or could not be needs. And I'll explain what I mean on today's episode, because we're going to talk about some wild card players and the way the Jets' views on them could impact draft strategy. Now, I think on this roster, you could make an argument the biggest wild card entering the 2022 season is Mekhi Becton. This was a player the Jets were very excited to draft in the top 15 just 2 years ago. He was supposed to be the franchise left tackle. In fact, at the time they drafted him, I think the idea was that for the next 10 to 15 years, Mekhi Becton would be blocking for Sam Darnold on Darnold's blind side. Of course, that did not work out because of the Darnold end of things, but the Becton end of things now, there are big question marks after what was really a lost season. And the Jets are opening up the left tackle position to a camp competition because George Fant in Becton's place played very well. And I'm going to maintain what I said a few weeks back. George Fant, if you're going purely on merit, George Fant deserves a chance to compete for that job. In fact, there's a part of me that really likes the fact that the Jets are not just giving out jobs based on draft position, because I do think that there are teams in the NFL who would say, we drafted this guy top 15 2 years ago. He's our left tackle. I don't care about performance. Performance should matter. So I do like that. That said, George Fant was good last year. I don't know that George Fant was so good that you just completely disregard your plans at left tackle. If you felt like, and I'm not criticizing the Jets for doing this right now. What I'm saying is that if you were completely confident in Mekhi Becton, George Fant may have been good. Was George Fant so good that you'd completely just disregard what you decided 2 years ago to do? I don't think so. And what that says to me is maybe the Jets have a little bit of doubt about Mekhi. And this is purely speculation. Don't quote me on this. I'm not using any insider information on this. This is just kind of an educated guess based on the fact that you're opening up the competition to a 30-year-old guy who really was good, but not like spectacular. It's not like George Fant suddenly was like a top 5 left tackle last year. He was solid. And quite frankly, he helped the Jets out a lot. This season, I mean, as bad as 4-13 was, a bad left tackle can destroy your offense. So having George Fant there provided a lot of stability. The Jets owe George Fant a lot for his play last year. But again, I go back to this. Was this so good that if you were confident in Becton, that you would just say, all right, now everything's open, even though we love Becton? To me, this is a sign maybe there's a little bit of doubt about Becton. or at the very least, maybe there's a little bit of doubt at his ability to hold up at the left tackle position. And if that's the case, and we're looking at this offensive line right now, I know a lot of us are looking at this offensive line saying, you know what, this unit's pretty good. And I think this unit's pretty good because I've been a Becton fan, and I think his rookie year in context, as a guy who's still learning how to play, was pretty solid. In fact, I would even say Becton, his rookie year in 2020, kind of exceeded my expectations. I thought he was a little bit further along than I was expecting entering the NFL out of Louisville. I was expecting there to be more problems. In fact, I was wondering whether the Jets would even begin him at left tackle as a rookie. They did, and it wasn't perfect, but lots of promise shown, and I think you all know he's got great physical tools. I mean, he has the tools to be a dominant tackle. That doesn't mean you always get there. Potential is potential. Until it's realized, it is only potential. But Mekhi Becton's a guy with a lot of physical ability, a guy who could be, if everything clicks for him, a great tackle in this league. But again, he just missed a full season. You know, he suffered that injury week 1 against Carolina, and listen, the Jets may have given you a bad time frame. The Jets have not been forthright about injuries in the Robert Saleh era, so that's something to keep in mind. And I'm not criticizing them. There are some teams that are more open than others about their injuries. I don't think that there's a right approach. I don't think that there's a wrong approach. The Jets gave you kind of an indication, though. They made it sound like he would be out like half the season, and then he never came back. And there are questions about that. And I think now there are questions heading into this offseason. How confident are the Jets in Mekhi Becton? And this could play a big role in their draft strategy, because if you're looking at where they're sitting at 4, there may not be a lot of obvious choices there. Now, if there's an edge available, maybe you look at that. Maybe it's, I don't think Aiden Hutchinson is going to fall to them. That would be a surprise. Of course, the draft is always full of surprises, so I could never rule anything out. But Kayvon Thibodeau, the guy we talked about on Friday, maybe he's an option. Trayvon Walker out of Georgia has been getting a lot of buzz recently. Maybe we may talk about him in a future episode. But there's also a possibility that all of these edge rushers could be off the board by the time the Jets pick. So what do you do then? And Robert Saleh made a joke last week at the NFL owners meetings that he and Joe Douglas were going to fight over the 4th pick because Saleh wants a defensive lineman. It's one of the things Saleh is always focused on. And Joe Douglas, of course, always wants an offensive lineman. Well, an offensive lineman doesn't make a ton of sense for the Jets at 4 unless you're not confident in Becton long term. And I think this is one of the things that can get lost. When you're in the NFL, it's always better to be proactive than reactive. I think sometimes when we look at the draft, we look at what we think the team's weakest positions are on paper, and we always take an optimistic view of every player on the roster. So if you look at this Jets offensive line right now, you say, well, this is fine. Becton's going to be fine because you're taking an optimistic view of things. We don't know whether the Jets have an optimistic view of Becton right now. And the draft may kind of help us figure that out, because if you don't have confidence in Becton and you're looking at this and you're saying, you know what, if we knew then what we know now, we wouldn't have drafted him. And I'm not saying this is what the Jets are saying. I'm saying this is what we got to find out. And this is what the Jets will show us based on how they approach the draft. But if there's a lack of confidence in Becton, then it actually might make sense to take one of these offensive linemen 4th overall, whether it's Ekwonu, whether it's Neal, Charles Cross. I don't know if Charles Cross is going to go at 4, but he's another guy who's viewed as an offensive lineman who's going to be drafted pretty high this year. You're not really drafting for this year. You're always drafting for kind of the future. And even though on paper right now you may say, well, offensive line's not that great of a need, it could become a need very quickly. It becomes a need quicker than you think. In fact, I remember back in 2010, the Jets at that point had the best offensive line in football, or if not the best, one of the best. And heading into the 2011 draft, there was lots of talk about how the Jets should not be looking to draft an offensive lineman. Why would we draft an offensive lineman? Our offensive line is great. Well, 1 year later, the offensive line was an issue. Offensive line becomes an issue quicker than you think. Sometimes it comes because somebody gets old. The Jets lost Damian Woody that offseason. It can also come just because guys don't develop the way you're expecting them to. And Becton right now, he's probably as big of a wild card as there is on this roster. So, I think I understand it if they don't go in this direction. I understand it if they have faith in Becton. To be honest with you, I'm probably more positive on Becton than a lot of Jets fans. I still, if you're asking me to make a prediction, My prediction is that he's going to play well this year, but I don't know what the Jets feel about him. It's entirely possible that the Jets are looking at the situation and saying, you know what, we don't have a lot of faith right now. And if they don't, then maybe you look to the offensive line at 4 or maybe 10. And there's another factor. The other wild card is George Fant, who's turning 30 and entering his last year of his contract. And in that sense, if you decide you're moving on from George Fant, or George Fant is going to regress after he hits his 30s, then it could make sense to just draft a guy, develop him for a year, and have him plug him into the lineup in year 2. So that's another factor that comes into play. But I do think, at the end of the day, how the Jets approach the offensive line in the draft and whether they draft somebody may tell you a lot about how confident they are in Mekhi Becton. Now, Becton's not the only player who's got a little question mark around him. There's a guy who I thought played pretty well last year at a premium position, and there's some buzz that maybe the Jets aren't thrilled with him. And we'll talk about that player and his position and how it could impact the draft strategy ahead here on this Monday episode of Locked On Jets. The NFL draft is approaching. The Jets are going to try and do things that will be good for the team. And if you want to do something good for your body, then I got to tell you about Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens was created when the founder experienced a ton of gut health issues and ended up on a complicated supplement routine to recover. It cost him $100 a day, so he created Athletic Greens after experiencing how difficult it was to create an optimal nutrition routine on his own. Athletic Greens are lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free diets. Athletic Greens contain less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals, no artificial anything, while still tasting good. It supports better sleep quality and recovery, and it supports mental clarity and alertness. It's the one thing with the best things. Athletic Greens uses the best of the best products based on the latest science with constant product iterations and third-party testing. And it costs you less than $3 a day. If you're investing in your health, it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. It's cheaper than getting all the different supplements yourself. You're investing in an all-in-one nutritional insurance. So to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL Network. Again, it's athleticgreens.com/NFL Network, athleticgreens.com/NFL NETWORK, to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Of course, our focus here is on the Jets. The NFL draft is approaching, but there's a big game tonight. The national championship of college basketball will be decided between the North Carolina Tar Heels and the Kansas Jayhawks. A couple of storied programs, with a very intertwined history, a very intriguing game. North Carolina coming out of nowhere to make this run to the championship game. Kansas, a number 1 seed, a team that was expected to be there. And you should know that if you want to bet on the game, that BetOnline is your number 1 source for all your sports betting needs and information. And it's not just college basketball you can bet on. You can bet on all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championships. You can get odds, podcasts, and reviews for all the different leagues this season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head to the website now or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen every day. And make sure you're following Locked On NFL. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we're talking about some of the wild cards on the Jets roster. And in particular, we're talking about how the Jets view them. It's not really clear how the Jets view some of these players. And depending on how the Jets view them, certain positions may become bigger needs in the draft than you might think. In the first segment, I talked about the tackle position. You ask the average Jets fan, is tackle a need? They're going to tell you no. That depends on how the Jets feel about Mekhi Becton, and I cannot tell you how the Jets feel about Mekhi Becton. I also cannot tell you about how they feel about the guy I'm going to talk about in this segment, although there has been some buzz among some of the beat writers that, and this has surprised me because I thought this was a guy who played well last year, but there's been some buzz that maybe the Jets are not thrilled with Bryce Hall. And why? I couldn't tell you. Again, I thought he was good last year. This is not me talking. This is beat writers talking about the Jets and giving us some buzz that maybe they're not thrilled with Bryce Hall. And thus, there has been some buzz that maybe the Jets will be interested in a corner early in the draft. That could be Sauce Gardner out of Cincinnati. And first, when you hear this, you might say, well, why would you do that? corner is really not a need, especially after you sign DJ Reed. You got DJ Reed and Bryce Hall. That's a pretty good duo. And I happen to agree with you on that. But it could be a situation where, for whatever reason, they don't love Bryce Hall. And, who knows? I mean, look, this time last year, I think we all would have laughed at reports that the Jets did not love Denzel Mims. I'm not saying Bryce Hall's going to turn into another Denzel Mims, but, sometimes the team knows something. If the Jets don't love Bryce Hall, maybe corners need. But you know what? I've been thinking about this, and I think it goes a little bit deeper than just needs. And I always warn this, that there is more that goes into draft strategy than just purely trying to find needs. And I was thinking about this Jets roster, and right now the Jets roster has a pretty big problem. It's a problem that's going to prevent them from winning games, and that's just a lack of overall impact talent. In fact, I was going through both sides of the ball. And there are players who are really solid players. There are position groups that are really solid position groups. There are some areas where the Jets are deep. But I can't think of a single player on this roster who forces the other team to change its approach. I can't think of a single single player on this roster who forces an opposing coordinator to alter his game plan. And that's a problem. Now, maybe it could be I think Elijah Moore could develop into that type of player. Even if he does, that's just one player, though. So it's not just about need. It's about forcing the other team to adapt. It's about making life uncomfortable for the other team because you've got an impact player. And I think at this point in time, the Jets are not really in a position where they have the luxury to be choosy about where that position comes from. And yeah, I like Bryce Hall, but if you're telling me like a Sauce Gardner, and we'll probably talk about him closer to the draft, but if you're telling me like a Sauce Gardner is going to be that type of impact player, if he's going to be a true shutdown corner, I don't know if Bryce Hall's good enough to say you definitively pass on him, because you need somebody, because a shutdown corner changes the defense. It forces the other team to adapt to you. And even if the Jets did not really have a defense where the number one corner last year was shadowing the other team's best receiver, but it at least forces the other, even if in a situation like that, it forces you to change where you're sending your receivers. You may not want to send your receiver to the shutdown corner side if you're on offense. Even if the number one corner is not going to travel with that receiver, you may kind of force the offense to change its approach by aligning the receiver on a different side of the field. You're essentially doing something that makes the other team uncomfortable, that forces the other team to adapt to you, because right now, really, the Jets are adapting to the opposition a lot because they don't have the type of player who dictates something like that, who dictates the other team has to adjust to the Jets, who changes the game. And the Jets really need that. And I get it. Like, Bryce Hall has done nothing, in my opinion, to deserve to go to the bench. But I also don't think Bryce Hall is the number one corner in this league. And I don't think the Jets do either. I mean, that's one thing I feel pretty confident in. I don't think the Jets really view Bryce Hall as the number one corner. Now, is DJ Reed a number one corner? Well, you could make an argument for that. I think that there's a very solid argument he is, but corner is one of those positions where it's not a bad thing to have overwhelming strength. And if you do that, I mean, you could turn this overnight into one of the best corner rooms in the league. And when you have two number one caliber corners, let's say DJ Reed is, and you draft another one, it makes your defense a lot easier. It opens up a lot. You can blitz a lot more because if you know that you've got coverage on the back of the defense, you can throw all sorts of exotic looks at offenses. It really makes your life a lot easier. So I look at the situation and I say, you know something? Is it an ideal world? Listen, in an ideal world, the impact player would match up with a position where you're weak, like edge rusher right now for the Jets. And ideally, somebody like, and I've talked about him on Friday, a Kayvon Thibodeau would fall to the Jets because aside from, they have Carl Lawson on one side. On the other side, I'm not really sure you have John Franklin Myers, but on passing downs, I think you want John Franklin Myers sliding inside. Maybe you want him outside on early downs to keep your line big, be able to absorb blocks. But I think on passing downs, when you got to get after the quarterback, you want to bookend a more natural edge rusher to pair with Lawson. But that may not happen. You have to draft the board that's there, not the board that you wish was there. You're not dealing with generic defensive end or generic corner. You could get to a point where the corner prospect is a legitimate shutdown corner prospect, and the defensive end who's available just really isn't that great. And in that situation, I think you look to make a unit an overwhelming strength. And again, it's not that Bryce Hall deserves to go to the bench. In fact, I could be very happy with Bryce Hall as the starting corner for the Jets next season. But I think that you've got to try and build an overwhelming strength somewhere. And Bryce Hall, suddenly, like, you draft a corner, this group's very deep. And, if you turn Bryce Hall into like your third outside corner as like a backup, you feel very good about that, because there's also an expression that on the defensive side of the ball, no position loses you games quicker with bad play than corner. So then you turn corner into a position where you can absorb an injury, and you can still make your defense work even if you don't stay healthy all year. Again, I'm not saying it's the first choice, but I think sometimes we're a little quick to dismiss ideas like this, and these do matter, because the Jets got to add some impact talent here. This is a roster that is completely lacking impact talent. Now, there are still some good players on this roster, however. In fact, there was one player the Jets claimed off waivers from Jacksonville last year, a guy the Jets seem very high on, and just how high they are on him could impact how the Jets approach the linebacker position. And we'll talk about that player ahead here on this Monday episode of Locked On Jets. Of course, today we are talking about Jets draft strategy. The players they draft will receive 4-year contracts from the team. They'll be paid in money, and maybe they'll use some of that money to buy Built Bars. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market. These are bars that are covered in 100% real chocolate. They're protein bars, but they don't taste like them, because there are many delicious flavors. You've got mint brownie, you've got coconut almond, there's white chocolate cookies and cream. These are all delicious flavors, and new flavors are coming out all the time. If they think a flavor might be good, they'll make it. It'll be delicious, and it'll be good for you. At Built Bar, they're all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first, then they figure out how to make it healthy. And I don't know how they do it, but they pull it off every time. Most of these bars contain only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which has around 240 calories usually, about 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. So go check out your options at Built.com. Again, that's Built.com, Built.com. If you see something you like, buy it. And let me help you out. If you use promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your orders. Now you got to do it. Again, it's promo code LOCKED15. It's one word with no space. LOCKED, number 1, number 5. 15% off at Built, Built.com for delicious Built Bars. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Monday, we are talking today about players who are kind of wild cards, players who you or I may have an opinion on, but we don't know exactly what the Jets' opinion is on them. And the Jets' opinion could alter their draft strategy, because they may think these guys are really good at their position and we don't need to draft somebody. Or they could think, you know what, this guy's not as good as the perception is, and maybe we should look at the draft to replace this guy. And the last player I'm going to talk about was a guy who really, I think, by all accounts, was a pleasant surprise last year, Quincy Wilson. Quincy Williams. Quincy Wilson was a corner the Jets had a couple years ago. They traded from the Colts. Quincy Williams was the linebacker they claimed from Jacksonville a year ago off waivers, and Quinnen Williams' brother. And he became a fan favorite because he hits hard, and he had a couple big games. I mean, the game against Tennessee threw up a big number. He had a couple of those big statistical games. So what I'm about to say is undoubtedly going to upset some Jets fans, but I don't know that Quincy Williams is really as good as the perception is. Now, I've talked about this before. There are certain players where you only notice them when they mess up, and that's like a deep safety, where like if a deep safety is doing his job, you're probably not going to notice him through the game, because he's just going to prevent big plays. He's going to prevent the other team from even attempting big plays, and the ball's probably not going to go to his area of the field. So there, you have players like that. And then you have players where you only notice it when they do something good. And, an example of that might be a pass rusher, where you're not really paying attention to a pass rusher when he's getting blocked completely. You only notice him when he's getting a sack. Now, Quincy Williams is not a pass rusher, but he's the type of guy you only notice when he's doing something well. You notice it when he's delivering a big hit. Yeah, I mean, you see it when he's really making a big time tackle. You don't see it when he's filling the wrong gap, though. You don't see it when he's not getting a great drop in coverage, or when he's struggling in man coverage. And these things happened pretty frequently last year. And to be honest with you, I don't see these things. The only reason I notice them is because I watch the games over. And I look at this and I say, you know what? I don't know that Quincy Williams is really a starter for this team. Now, the buzz for the Jets, we talked about Bryce Hall, how there's been surprising buzz among some of the beat writers that Jets don't love Bryce Hall. The buzz has been the opposite for Quincy Williams. There's talk, I mean, I've even read an article that Quincy Williams, the Jets think he has Pro Bowl potential. Now, I'm not here to say what Quincy Williams' potential is. It's entirely plausible that he's got Pro Bowl potential because we can only talk about what the player's done to this point. There's also player development. There's also the concept that players can improve through their careers. So I don't know whether, listen, they work with him every day. They're going to have him this offseason. They're going to have the opportunities during OTAs to really work on his game. I just think right now he's a weakness. He's not like a sub-NFL talent. There's a difference between, being a guy who's just kind of okay and being a guy who's terrible. We've seen plenty of terrible linebackers on the Quincy Williams is not a terrible linebacker. In fact, I would even go as far to say he is a major success story for the Jets because usually guys you get off waivers don't really give you anything. Much less guys you get off waivers from the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's not even like he came from a good team. There are certain teams where the 54th best player is going to be better than the 53rd best player on the Jets. Quincy Williams came in and played some good games. But my question is does that mean he's a good backup? Does that mean he's like a starter you can live with if everything else is working? Or does this mean he, on his own, is an impact player? And I think the linebacker core for the Jets, there were more issues last year than you realize. I mean, they were a big part of why this defense was so bad. They're not the only reason. Listen, everybody, I think almost everybody's got to take some of the blame, but the linebackers, fill in the wrong gaps, issues in coverage. There were a lot of things not to love at the linebacker position. And if the Jets think they can develop Williams into a player, maybe they sit out the linebacker in the draft. But there are some good linebackers available. I mean, I don't know if they're going to go Lloyd at 10 from Utah, but there are some good potential linebackers available in round 2. And maybe even if you trade down from 10, the linebacker becomes a more viable possibility. But the Jets are not going to consider that if they think Quincy Williams can be developed into a starting level player. So that'll be another kind of referendum. And again, you draft a linebacker, you feel very good about Quincy Williams as a backup. I think he's a very good backup. I think as a starter right now, he's a guy who's kind of okay if everything else is. I mean, he's the type of guy you can live with if he's like your 9th or 10th or 11th best starter on defense. I don't know that I'm as high on him as a lot of Jets fans are, though. I don't know that he's an impact player on this defense. And we'll see what the Jets think. If the Jets think he is, then they may sit out linebacker. I'm not sure that that's the best idea, though. But I guess we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, if you enjoyed the show, subscribe to it. Leave it a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source. And if you're watching on YouTube, please thumbs up. It helps the channel out. Helps other Jets fans find the channel. Hope you have a great Monday, everybody. Enjoy the national championship game if you're a college basketball fan. And we'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.